The metal of the railing is freezing against her spine, but she stopped feeling the cold about 30 seconds ago, which is when she decided she was going to die here. She is 23 years old. She is standing on the 42nd floor of a penthouse that belongs to the most dangerous man in Chicago. Her white silk dress is ruined, streaked with mud from the docks, and the rain has plastered her dark hair flat against her face. Behind the man in front of her, 3 armed men wait in the shadows like furniture. On the marble floor between her and Dante Moretti lies a gun. Neither of them has touched it in the last 60 seconds. Neither of them is looking at it. Dante's hand is around her throat, not squeezing, just holding, as though she is a thing he cannot decide whether to keep or destroy. He leans in until his breath touches her face, and he says quietly, with the kind of quiet that has ended other people's lives, "I gave you my soul, Elara, and you sold it to the feds for a disappearing act." She doesn't answer. She can't. Not because his hand is stopping her, but because the truth she's holding would break him. And she has decided, standing here on the edge of 42 floors of nothing, that she would rather he hate her and live than know the truth and be destroyed by his brother's name. She closes her eyes. She waits. And this is where we begin. Before we find out what happens next, I need you to do something for me. Tell me where you are right now. Are you curled up at home, rain against the window, somewhere in London or Edinburgh? Are you on a train, pretending to the person beside you that you're listening to something serious? Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here with me at Morvyn Tales. If you haven't already, press subscribe and join our inner circle, because this story is only just starting, and if you leave now, you'll miss the moment that changes everything. Now, let me take you back to where this actually began. Elara Vance had spent her entire life being invisible, and she had learned to use it. She grew up in the foster system, moved between houses the way other people move between rooms, never staying long enough to leave a mark anywhere. By the time she was 19, she had taught herself accounting from library books and online courses, and the kind of obsessive, quiet desperation that only people who have nothing else to hold on to ever really develop. She had a photographic memory for numbers. She could look at a column of figures and see, the way some people see shapes in clouds, the exact place where someone had lied. She took the job at Meridian Logistics because it paid 3 times what anything else would pay and asked no questions she couldn't answer. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself a lot of things back then. Her sister Mia was 11 when the diagnosis came. The medical bills were specific and enormous and arriving every month with the indifference of water. Elara kept a small silver locket under her collar with Mia's photograph inside it, and when she needed to say something that wasn't true, she would press the locket between her fingers and breathe, and her heart rate would stay steady, and no one would know. She did not know, for the first 3 months, who actually owned Meridian Logistics. Then she found out, and it was too late to leave. Dante Moretti was 31 years old, and he controlled the international shipping ports of Chicago, the way a surgeon controls a scalpel, with precision, with patience, and with the complete absence of sentiment. Publicly, he was a billionaire philanthropist. His name was on hospital wings and university libraries. Privately, he was the thing that other dangerous men were afraid of, not because he was violent, though he could be, but because he was always 3 moves ahead and he never, ever acted without information. The only thing anyone knew about his private life was that he collected antique clocks. His penthouse was full of them. Pocket watches from the 19th century, mantel clocks with enamel faces, carriage clocks in brass cases with beveled glass. He took them apart himself with surgical tools and reassembled them on evenings when the work of running an empire left him too restless to sleep. People who didn't know him thought it was eccentricity. People who did know him understood it was something else entirely. A man who had been failed by time, by the people who should have protected him, trying in the only way available to him to make something broken run correctly again. His mother had sold information about his father to a rival family when Dante was 9 years old. His father was dead by the time Dante was 10. He had never trusted anyone's affection since, which made him, depending on how you looked at it, the safest or most dangerous man in Chicago to be loved by. She was brought to his study at 2 in the morning, and she expected violence. What she got was stranger. He was sitting at his desk when they brought her in. A 19th century pocket watch in pieces on the cloth in front of him, a scalpel in his right hand. He did not look up. He let the silence do what silence, in rooms like his, always does. Then he slid a ledger across the desk and told her he knew she had been skimming. She did not flinch. She looked at the ledger. She found the entry she needed in approximately 45 seconds, and she pointed to it and told him, calmly, that he was being robbed by his own northern supplier, to the tune of $400,000 over the past 18 months, and that whoever had told him she was the leak had either made a significant accounting error or was deliberately sending him in the wrong direction. He set down the scalpel. He stood. He walked slowly around the desk and stood behind her, and she felt his hand rest on the back of her chair, and she did not allow herself to move. The room smelled of clock oil and expensive wood and something underneath both of those things that she could not name and chose not to examine. He leaned down until his voice was at her ear, and he told her she now belonged to him, not as an employee, as his personal truth seeker. She had two options: refuse and leave the building in a way that was not through the door, or agree and become the most protected woman in Chicago. She pressed her fingers against the locket under her collar and told herself it was just a job. She was wrong about that within approximately 2 weeks. It was the clocks that did it, if she was being honest with herself later, when being honest with herself was still possible. She would find him in the study at midnight, not at his desk, but standing at the window with a small brass carriage clock in his hands, not fixing it, just holding it, the way you hold a thing you don't want to put down. He never explained himself. He never asked her to stay, but he would begin talking about port contracts, about family politics, about a book he had read once that he thought was wrong about something specific, and she would find that it was 3 in the morning and she was still in the chair across from him, and neither of them had noticed the time passing, which struck her as significant, given the clocks. She told herself she was gathering information. She told herself she was being strategic. She stopped being able to tell herself anything convincing the evening he brought her a cup of tea she hadn't asked for, set it beside her without a word, and went back to his desk, and she sat very still for a moment with both hands around the warm cup and understood that something in her that had been locked for a very long time was becoming interested in being opened. 3 weeks into her new role, she found Lorenzo's account. Lorenzo Moretti was Dante's younger brother and the vice head of the syndicate's operations, and the offshore account she found in the family's shell structure had his name threaded through it in the way that only someone who believed they would never be caught would leave their name, carelessly, almost arrogantly. She had been making notes for 2 hours when she heard the door. Lorenzo was not like his brother. Where Dante was stillness and precision, Lorenzo was performance. The easy smile, the expensive suit, the laugh that arrived just before the threat. He looked at the ledger in front of her, and he looked at her face, and he understood immediately what she had found, and the smile didn't change at all, which was the most frightening thing about him. He told her what would happen to Mia if she mentioned the account to anyone. He told her with the same pleasant tone he might use to describe the weather. And then he told her what he needed her to do instead: feed Dante a false trail that would lead him to the docks on the night of a federal operation. Make it look like a routine meeting. Make sure Dante walked into it himself. She sat in her apartment that night and did not move for a long time. Then she pressed Mia's locket between her fingers until the small silver edge left a mark on her palm, and she began to think. She tried to warn him. She embedded a coded sequence in the margin notes of the following week's financial report, a pattern of figures that, if you knew to look for it, described a meeting time, a location, and the word compromised. Dante did not see it. Or if he saw it, he did not understand it. She did not know which was worse. The night at the docks arrived with rain and blue and red lights already cutting the darkness when Dante's car reached the waterfront. And by the time she understood the trap had been sprung, there was nothing she could do except stand in the rain and watch it collapse around her. The things she had been trying to prevent becoming the things she was blamed for. Lorenzo had prepared for this. The photographs existed before the night was over. Elara, standing outside a building, with a man in a gray coat. A man who looked exactly like a federal agent if you did not know he was actually a retired Moretti loyalist she had hired, privately and desperately, to help her find out where Lorenzo was keeping Mia. The photographs told a story. The story was false. Dante believed it because his mother had sold his father for exactly this kind of transaction, and his mind, built on that foundation, had no room for any other interpretation. And so we are back on the balcony. The rain is still falling. The gun is still on the floor. His hand is still at her throat. I need to ask you something before we go any further. If you were her, standing at the edge of everything, knowing the one truth that could save you would also break the man who is deciding whether you live or die, would you speak? Would you trust a man like Dante Moretti with the most dangerous words you know? She spoke. She took his wrist in both her hands, not to remove it, just to hold it. And she looked at him directly, and she said, "Pull the trigger, Dante, do it. Because if I live, I have to look at a man who thinks so little of me that he believes I'd trade your life for a paycheck. I didn't betray you to the feds. I betrayed myself by thinking you were capable of loving something more than your own suspicion." He did not move. She reached down. She picked up the gun from the floor. She pressed the muzzle against her own chest, over her heart, and she closed her eyes. She was not performing. Her hands were steady. The locket was cold against her sternum beneath the silk. She was giving him the only proof she had left, which was herself. He stood there for 4 seconds. She counted them. Then he took the gun from her hands. He stepped back. He put the gun on the railing behind him, and he put his face in his hands, and she saw his shoulders move once, the single controlled movement of a man who has spent 20 years not allowing himself to breaking. She did not go to him. She stood very still and watched, because she understood that this moment was his, and she did not have the right to manage it. She had already said everything there was to say. It was his enforcer who found the proof. A phone record, time-stamped and traced, showing Lorenzo had used Dante's personal device to contact the federal tip line 40 minutes before Dante arrived at the docks. The man in the gray coat was identified by morning. By midday, Dante knew everything, and the knowing was a different kind of violence, quiet and internal and complete. He did not ask her forgiveness. He did not appear at her door with explanations. Instead, 36 hours later, 3 of Dante's men found Lorenzo's safe house, and Dante walked in himself, with a gunshot wound in his left shoulder from the altercation that followed, and he carried Mia out. He drove her to the hospital. He sat in the waiting room until the doctors confirmed she was unhurt. Then he called a meeting of the High Council. He told them the betrayal had been a test. He told them Elara had passed it. He told them, with the absolute authority of a man who has decided and cannot be moved, that she was to be his wife and the matriarch of the Moretti family, and that anyone who questioned it should consider carefully whether they wished to be in the same room as him when the question was finished being asked. No one asked. The study looks different now. The clocks are gone, not broken, not discarded, packed carefully in their cases and stored. The shelves where they stood are occupied by other things: her accounting books, a photograph of Mia from last Christmas, a small potted plant she brought in one afternoon that he did not comment on and did not remove. She sits in his chair. This happened gradually, the way most important shifts happen, not through a decision, but through a series of mornings where the arrangement simply made sense. He stands behind her now, his hand on her shoulder, looking at the same ledger she is looking at, and the power between them is not his or hers, but shared. The way weight is shared by two people carrying something that neither could carry alone. He is different in the ways that matter. He still moves through the world with the precision of a man who understands that silence is a weapon, but there is something beneath the precision now that was not there before. A willingness to be wrong, to be seen, to admit that the most significant intelligence failure of his career was not a federal agent or a rival syndicate, but his own certainty that he already knew who she was. Lorenzo lives on a property in the north of the country, under a name that is not his own, and a budget that is not comfortable. He no longer has the Moretti name or its resources. He was not killed. Dante told her once quietly that this was more of a punishment than death, and she believed him. Mia's medical care is handled. This was the first thing Dante organized after the hospital. He did not mention it. She found out through the billing notification, and she sat with the information for a long moment, and then she filed it away in the same place she keeps the things that are too large to respond to immediately. She is not naive about who she has married. She understands the ledgers she manages and what they mean and what world she now moves through with her name attached to his. She chose it with her eyes open, which is the only way she has ever chosen anything. What Dante learned finally and at great cost is that the most dangerous thing a man who has built his empire on information can do is to believe he already has all of it. He had all the files. He had all the photographs. He had the instincts of a man who had survived by never trusting anyone. And he was still wrong, because the one variable he had not accounted for was a woman in a ruined white dress who pressed his gun to her own chest and closed her eyes, and in doing so told him more truth than 20 years of intelligence work had ever managed. Thank you for staying with me tonight for the story of Elara and Dante, the bookkeeper who could read the lies in numbers, and the man who nearly destroyed the only person who ever read him honestly. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Morvyn Tales and come back. There are more shadows here, more silk, more secrets worth knowing. And if you don't subscribe, well, I might just send Dante to collect. Until next time, keep your secrets close and your heart closer.